All right, what we've all been waiting for here, the election results. Whoa. All right, our first, do you people want to do a little swearing in thing, or is that a little too extra for you? Because I have the text that we would swear in on.
I would say that's a little too extra.
MSOE Centennial 100th Anniversary book.
I say we do it.
The president at least will have to. It's required now.
It's in the Constitution.
The lower ones may also choose to.
Wait, did you?
Our treasurer is Gabby, who loves filling out one-year plastic stuff. Right? Okay, I'll move on then. All right, she does not want the ceremony. Secretary Noah Basing, who I expect to take all meeting minutes in LaTeX. We don't have to do meeting minutes.
I've been taking meeting minutes.
But you do have to take them.
If you take meeting minutes, you're just transcribing everything. You'll have to
John
write another one of these.
Yeah.
Vice President, Braden Kuczynski. And finally, President, a very contentious race, Mia. Yeah, so Mia, what we've got here is the President's copy of the 100th anniversary book that will be handed down through all of the presidents. And I've signed it, and I think all the presidents will sign it. So that'll be our ceremonial thing. If you would like.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So then I put 2023, 24.
Oh yeah.
It's done.
Or you may hold it up for the camera if you'd like. Oh yeah. Okay. Now we'll be switching gears with a featured presentation. Oh boy. Yeah, Metro. I got all of these from Metro earlier today.
Oh no! Put it away! Put it away!
The memories are flooding back. Oh, you should have had a warning before. I should have brought Teams, virtual learning, lab in person. You gotta wear a mask.
Yes.
Oh.
I think it's the plexiglass shields.
I can't hear anybody.
Yes, office actually.
Right.
Masks on my
This is
computer.
my stash of everything that I've stolen from this university. Oh, I never changed the slide. Okay, well, all right. So, those of you who are, frequenters of our meetings will already know that MSOE had experimented with distance learning back in the 1980s. Ken Peterson, who was our head of AV and also a videographer, many other things, and only retired recently. And actually, I was in an email chain with the Newman video, so I've technically spoken-ish to Ken Peterson. We did look into this whole distance learning thing where we would overnight mail VHS tapes to people with lectures, and they could call into classes using the phone, So, in some ways we've done it before, but not for everything, and it required a specialized classroom with lighting and stuff. And actually, we came up with this document for the 2009 H1N1 pandemic, which I got a copy of this from the CC last year because it was still in that corner with all the papers in it and stuff. So from September 2009, we had information on how to protect yourself from the H1N1 flu. And so when this came out, we did have a quarantine zone on the top of MLH. I don't think anyone was in it because in reality, the H1N1 pandemic did not hit very hard. Some people were a little concerned about it back then, and rightfully so. And so that was the last time we had to think about something like this happening. And the pandemic response plan was put together and edited in 2009. where we thought about ways that this would affect our school, but it was not nearly in depth for what was to come. And an interesting thing about H1N1, in 2009, a mobile game called Angry Birds came out where birds killed pigs, and that was the whole swine flu thing, and the whole app was kind of a joke on that. So, yeah, yes.
Were you able to get a word from shotgun_ninja?
Shotgun underscore ninja. He's a quoted fellow from the MSOE subreddit who actually said that the 12th floor of MLH was turned into a quarantine zone. So that's how we know that happened. Our primary source is Reddit.
No, but that's why the couches and beds up there. You can pull out the couches and use
No,
them.
that's because we got those from a hotel.
Oh.
Yeah. At a very discounted rate. Do not use them, they're gross.
Yeah.
Okay, so the story of COVID-19 starts in Wuhan, China. That's our understanding of it anyways, and I guess something I should start with here, right? Like I'm gonna start from the top here. Most topics that we cover at these meetings, people do not die, right? I mean, this is maybe the only meeting we will ever have where people related to the MSOE community actually like pass away. So I understand that this can be a very serious topic as well, and I think that should be considered as I present, that there is some serious weight to this. And in many ways, people are still getting COVID-19, and we're not necessarily done with it. It's just something that we live with now. So another interesting thing about this is perhaps the only meeting where and many of us, well, actually all of us lived through it, but not necessarily at MSOE. So I'm doing this not necessarily as this is something that happened 20 or 40 years ago, but this is something that we can talk about, that we actually lived through. And the purpose of this meeting is more of preserving what we saw than telling stories from other people. So that's kind of why I'm doing this. And I thought it would be a little quicker than other things, so we can do it with our e-board election announcement. Okay, so we're still actually figuring out the exact source of this, but we know that in December of 2019 it was found that we were starting to pick up that people were getting this novel virus that had never been seen before, and it did not respond to the treatments that we had at the time for different viruses. So that was in December of 2019. And in January, to late January, almost February, is actually the first time MSOE addressed this. We've been kind of seeing in the news that this was something that was happening in China increasingly over time. And so it was now like in the consciousness of Americans by this point. But it was still something that was largely considered not here and not something that we would necessarily have to worry about. When this email came out, the administrators at MSOE were aware of one case in the United States, I believe. Yeah, one confirmed case in the state of Washington. So we're like, okay, it's like here, but it's not really here, and we're gonna play it by ear and see what happens, because we don't really know. And in reality, around this time, we had about 12 cases in the US that were confirmed by the CDC. So the information wasn't really getting out there too much, but we were at least aware of it by about early February. So I ran a newspaper in my dorm floor called the Floor 10 Times. It was posted on the back of the stalls in the bathrooms for people to read. And by week 11 of the winter quarter, it had reached the point of making it onto this dorm newspaper. So we see that the Dow plunged over 1,000 points because the number of cases of COVID were jumping, especially in China. And this was leading to lockdowns in China. And a lot of the, economic concerns were not really yet because of here, but because China is the second largest economy in the world and they were shutting down a major manufacturing city, and the concern was that it would spread around to other manufacturing areas and that would disrupt the economy. So there was a lot of concern about that, and here in the US we start seeing people purchasing things out of panic. So masks, hand sanitizers, and toilet paper. I mean, you could not get toilet paper anywhere. It was really weirdly specific to toilet paper. And everyone was kind of doing it. Do you have something to add, Aiden?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, you're good, yeah. So that's kind of how that happened. And then The Onion put out a thing that says, you know, PETA says, why do you want to kill one and make the other your pet? And it's COVID and the dog. So, because they're both living things. Okay, this is a news clip from early
Continues to
March.
climb in Washington. 9 people have now died from coronavirus.
In Wisconsin, 21 people have been tested. 19 of those tests have come back negative, 1 positive and 1 test still pending. There is growing concern tonight regarding the virus and its potential impact on major events.
Ben Jordan shares what it could mean for Milwaukee Bucks games and the Democratic National Convention.
Tensions continue to rise over the potential spread of the coronavirus in Wisconsin. Governor Tony Evers is calling an urgent meeting tomorrow between lawmakers and health officials to examine the state's response. Meanwhile, Milwaukee Bucks co-owner Mark Lasry told CNBC that it could get to the point of keeping fans from attending games.
I think what you'll do is there'll be fewer people who will be coming to those games, or you may not have individuals who are there, but I think you'll still end up having the games.
The NBA announced that players have been ordered to limit contact with fans due to the coronavirus. That means no high fives or taking items such as pens for autographs. Milwaukee Bucks president Peter Feigin says fans will be reminded to wash hands inside Fiserv Forum.
So I think everything from, you know, how we have dispensers around the concourses and the bathrooms, reminders to really wash hands, and then personal contact probably at the moment, you know, should be held back until the risk subsides.
Clearly we don't want to have it here, but clearly we are preparing to have it here.
Mayor Tom Barrett says it's too early to tell if the Democratic National Convention will be impacted. But as of now, there isn't medicine to prevent the spread.
I'm hoping that we've got some really smart scientists who are working around the clock right now to try to find something to deal with this issue before it gets spread too widely in the United States.
Mayor Barrett says conversations with health officials haven't been limited to large events in Milwaukee. He says workplaces and local schools could be impacted by the coronavirus in the coming weeks. Reporting outside Fiserv Forum, Ben Jordan, TMJ4 News.
Yeah. So this is kind of a more forward-looking news clip. I would say by March 3rd, this was not necessarily on everybody's radar, and we certainly were not looking at shutting things down. But you can see, like, you know, the leadership at the Bucks and other groups were recognizing that this could, they basically predicted everything that would happen in this news clip. A lot of the response was focused on touching things, you know, washing hands and cleaning surfaces. At the time, we didn't really understand that it was spread mostly through the air by particles, and we were very concerned about touch, you know, and that's something that you'll see early on. This is from the MSOE Discord, you know. What do people think of the possibility that coronavirus might actually shut the school down? Unlikely unless it gets really bad. It's overhyped in my opinion. Etc.
Shame.
Yeah.
John, you really look incredible here.
What? So, the whole student body was pretty convinced. I mean, you look at like our track record with snow days and stuff, and we kind of had a reputation where MSOE never shuts down. You know, for anything, right? Like there could be a nuclear Armageddon and MSOE would still be running.
Do we know who the deleted user is?
We do. I do. They deleted their Discord account after dropping out of MSOE for different reasons, but yes. They were not deleted by COVID-19. But, there was also very high confidence in the American medical system. Like we saw Mayor Barrett saying, you know, we have doctors working around the clock to figure this out, and you know, we really thought like, okay, like overseas they can't really handle this, but in America, you know, we can keep this under control. And as we saw later, we did a pretty bad job at that, you know, being like the world leader at some points. So overall, we all thought it was kind of overhyped. This is the first time by Monday. Okay, so I'll say other schools at this point were over their spring break. We're talking St. Pat's week, week 1 of the spring term here. Other schools on semester systems are over break. So MSOE announces on Monday of the first week of classes that they're not going to be doing study abroad programs, which makes sense because, you know, there's a lot of outbreaks in other countries like China, South Korea, Italy, and Iran. So, and then they also say, you know, they give you a list of things to do to kind of prevent spreading most diseases that hopefully people are doing anyways, but probably not, you know. And behind closed doors, the administration is starting to tell professors that we might be looking at making some major changes here. Over the course of the first week, we start to see the opinion on campus shift, especially like when this email comes out, you start to see the students think more of it as a matter of when we're going to cancel classes rather than if. And many conversations around campus are dominated by talking about COVID. This is a top secret email, does not leave this room. So Eric Baumgartner, who is in charge of academics at MSOE, says, you know, faculty, in light of campus communication on Monday, we need to develop plans to potentially move our learning environment to an online platform. If you've been watching the news, a number of higher education institutions across the nation have made the decision to forego in-person classes and move to digital learning environments. Just yesterday, all public and private colleges and universities in Ohio have canceled in-person classes by order of their governor. So they say, you know, we needed to potentially look into this, but then they also start giving like exact steps on how you can do this. So, you know, if they say, well, we might do this and start figuring this out now, it's kind of like, you know, it's gonna happen, you know. They don't say it's gonna happen, but they're giving you exact steps for implementation, which heavily suggests that it's going to happen. This is on Wednesday of that week, so, you know, we're going from Monday to Wednesday here. And that's at, when is that? That's at 8:47 a.m. At 10:12 a.m., the email spreads from going to all faculty to all staff. So now we're not just looping in professors, but also people who work for the university that are not teaching classes. And, you know, now we start going into saying, it's important for us to reassure students, parents, and other stakeholders that MSOE's educational enterprise will continue and no student will be disadvantaged by the situation. So early on, you know, we were very focused on preserving what MSOE gives to our students, and they're kind of trying to quell any uncertainties here with that. But, you know, this communication to staff makes it pretty clear the direction that we're planning on going. Some other universities start responding. So on March 11th, I think that might be the same day. Yeah, so this is still Wednesday. UW-Madison and actually the entire UW system announced that they would return from their spring break to online classes, and they would extend their spring break an extra week. So something that MSOE had that other schools did not have is that we did have a week where we were in person. So we had a lot of meetings with administrators that were, you know, in offices, and we were kind of better able to figure this out than the other schools would have been. So that kind of gave us the upper hand. Marquette followed on March 12th, so this would be the Thursday of that week, where they also made the same decision to return online and suspend classes for a week after their break. So MSOE puts out our first communication on, what date is this? I keep removing the days and stuff. So that was
Thursday, March 12th.
Well, yeah, it is the 12th, but that's a
How
Thursday.
did I know it was a Thursday?
It's a Thursday.
This is Thursday.
So at 12:05 p.m., the first email comes out where we say it's a rapidly evolving situation and we respect the individual decisions of students, faculty, and staff to stay away from classes or large gatherings if they do not feel comfortable being in these settings. So this is something that they put out, you know, while they were still figuring out things on the back end, but they're not going to make people go to classes at this point anymore. And basically, in the morning, I just talked to Kip because I went to his office to pick up some of the merch. And Kip was saying that on this day in the morning, he was in the mindset that we would be able to get through this and that we wouldn't have to go online. And then between the morning and the afternoon of that day, basically everyone switched gears to we'll be online. So it was a very rapidly evolving situation. It was not like something that actually was decided within, you know, it wasn't decided over a long period of time. We really didn't want to do this. I'll just say that. We didn't want to do this. 4:51 p.m. of that day, which is still the Thursday, it's formally announced that classes are not going to be continuing. So faculty at MSOE will have 1 week to prepare for online instruction, and it's expected that we would return to campus on April 13th. So we really thought, you know, okay, we'll send everyone home, everyone's going to stay in their houses, right? We're not going to spread it around, and then it'll just kind of disappear, and then we'll come back on April 13th, and it'll be, you know, just like before. And that was kind of, you know, that was kind of what people thought. You know, it kind of made sense because this early on there weren't really that many cases that we were aware of where we would say that there was a large community spread at this point. It was more thought of as people coming from airplanes, from trips overseas that brought it back with them. And then we isolate those people, and then, you know, we don't have it spreading around. So yeah. And also our final exam week was eliminated. That was part of the plan because we lost a week to figuring out what we're doing. The end of the term, we subtracted a week from finals. So what do the residents do at this point? So the cafeterias are still open, and they're still serving food. And we use disposable plates and utensils because it'll be like cleaner or something, you know? And it's like, we're not, you know, separating people at the tables. You have these very long cafeteria tables that were filled with people who live in the dorms. And the only change that they made is that they had disposable utensils, and the food was served by the dining hall workers rather than self-serve. So, you know, they had kind of, usually you just grab your own food, which is something that we do now. And I guess like throughout the pandemic, we did see that, you know, food was served by dining hall workers rather than self-service. So that is something that continued. That was a good idea. The next day on Friday, they were not serving food in the cafeteria. I guess I also added that what they did to try to spread people out is they served food from Roscoe's and from the cafeteria that day, whereas the Roscoe's kind of cafe was only really open at night before, but in order to just get people through and not have big lines, you know, they decided they would open both to serve food during the day. That was another change that they did. when we were told to move out of the dorms, we were under the impression that we would be coming back April 12th. So you didn't take everything out of your room, you only took out the essentials. So I left a lot of stuff in my room that would have been nice to have. And the building, like, you couldn't go back until they had like a formal move out procedure. So your stuff was in there, you know. Kind of tragic, but it is what it is. And so now that we know that we're not having classes for a bit, we're thinking through how are we going to reimburse students, right? Because if we don't have people eating from the cafeteria, why are you paying for a meal plan? You know, if you're not living in your dorm, you probably want some of that money back. And they're reviewing all of those things. But they didn't announce that we were getting our money back until after they said we were not coming back April 12th. Because they were like, well, you know, if you do come back, we're going to kind of adjust it a bit and make it a partial reimbursement. Of course, once it was announced that we weren't coming back, they did reimburse people for housing and meal plans. But like very early on, they decided that they would reimburse for parking passes because public safety had decided that with the administrators separately. And even if you were parking on campus, you just wouldn't be charged for it. So that was considered like, you know, fine. The School of Nursing also donated a bunch of protective equipment to hospitals because as we saw, a bunch of people were buying that stuff up. It was hard to find. We had a good amount of it for our classes and we weren't teaching them for a bit, so we donated those, and that was very good. And these are actually pictures of some of the stuff that we donated. Oh, Mitch.
Regarding the housing reimbursement, were you guys reimbursed at the week 1 rate or the week 4 rate?
I believe it was at the week 1 rate, yeah. And there were also checks sent out based on some money that MSOE got for the CARES Act.
Yeah,
so they mailed out some checks to students for that. It's kind of interesting to think that this happened kind of at a good spot in time because we didn't really have a lot of this online infrastructure until our lifetimes. Certainly within the last 20 or so years, you had online shopping that most people would do. You know, you could order food and grocery deliveries from your phone. Just video calling in general, like having the internet bandwidth to do that. It was really kind of more of a recent thing. I mean, before the pandemic, I'd never really used Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you know. Some people had FaceTime because that was kind of built into the phone and it was kind of ubiquitous. But as far as the more business side of things, most people would just use the phone or talk in person or email. And actually, with the developing technology that we had, we were able to put out vaccines for COVID-19 over 9 months, where the previous record was 4 years. And with that, what they did is they took the virus from a child, put it into a chicken egg, replicated it a bunch of times, and then it was kind of more suited to chickens and less humans. And then they would inject it back into people. So this was, you know, a pretty wild development. So as far as the statistics here, these are from the Pew Research Center. 90% of Americans, US adults, said that the internet had been essential for them. Also you saw on the opposite side of that 40% of US adults who responded to this said that they often or sometimes felt worn out or fatigued from spending time on video calls. And that was a very common sentiment. Basically, yeah. Okay, so I'll fire up another.
Died from coronavirus in our area, bringing the total number of Wisconsin deaths to 26. Waukesha County registered its first death, an 85-year-old woman from Milwaukee. A 72-year-old man also died in Milwaukee today. According to the medical examiner, both died at a hospital from complications of coronavirus. 1,413 people in Wisconsin have now tested positive. That's compared to 3 positive cases that we saw just 3 weeks ago. And we just learned within the hour, a parking worker at Mitchell International Airport tested positive for corona.
Yeah. Okay, so we see individualized reporting, and we give a lot of detail, like, oh, this guy working at this baggage claim tested positive for COVID, you know. And then everyone kind of freaked out that was at the airport because they might have contacted this one very specific individual. And at this point, we're starting to see that it's starting to increase with the number of cases in Wisconsin. Oh. Sorry. Okay. So now we start to see the very large responses coming in. So there are mandates to stay at home from the government that come out March 23rd. You see hashtags like hashtag keep your distance, hashtag flatten the curve, hashtag safer at home. These were kind of ubiquitous catchphrases that were used in this time period. So, you know, every non-essential business was closed at this point. You sit-down restaurants would have to either figure out some sort of takeout plan or not serve food at all. Even like libraries, playgrounds were closed, so a lot of ways that people could get out of their houses to socialize or even just to access the internet at a library would not be possible at this point. As far as the on-campus community at MSOE, we moved to these online platforms like Discord and Reddit. And then MSOE decides through the term that they are going to go to a pass-fail grading model because a lot of students are concerned about how they're doing in classes. They decide that this is just not going to count towards GPA, which did not benefit me at the time. I advocated for it, but you know, a lot of my freshman year A's did not count. This is, I mean, with the stay-at-home orders, you see that there are really not a lot of people going around a very large city. And actually what was interesting is at the time we saw that our global CO2 emissions were actually reversing. And like the air quality in the city greatly increased for this period of time. But it's just kind of insane how few cars are out driving on the street at this time.
Hello, greetings from Milwaukee School of Engineering. I'm John Walls, and I have the honor of serving as president of MSOE. Needless to say, the last few weeks have been unlike anything that our university has ever experienced in its 117-year history. Slightly over a month ago, and it's hard to believe that that's all it's been, we made the decision to halt all educational activities on our campus and send the majority of our students, faculty, and staff home. We made this decision to protect our community from the coronavirus pandemic that was spreading across our state, our nation, and our world. And those actions have worked. To date, we have had no COVID-19 cases on our campus. We took a week off to allow our faculty time to transition their classes to a strictly online mode. And then after that, we went right back at it. This was clearly not an easy transition, and it took a tremendous amount of work by our faculty and staff. but I cannot be more impressed by the way that our community has adjusted. Sure, there were some hiccups along the way, and our faculty continue to make improvements. But in one-on-one calls that we attempted to place to each and every one of our students, including 50 calls that I made myself, the overwhelming sentiment that we heard was that things were going okay. And the good news is that we were able to keep all students progressing toward their degree on schedule. But while this educational approach is working, it is clearly not the one that we prefer, and certainly not the one that has become our distinction. Namely, a hands-on, application-focused approach in which students learn by doing. So as we near the end of this spring quarter, it is time for us to start thinking about and preparing for the fall. The first and most important thing that I will tell you is that it is our intention to be fully back to regular on-campus operations, including in-person classes, starting with our fall 2020 quarter. That is what you, our students, tell us you want. That is what our faculty and staff want, and that is what I want. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't take every precaution that we possibly can to protect you. Right now, our Vice President of Academics, Dr. Eric Baumgartner, is leading an active pandemic response team, a group of faculty and staff who are developing a list of recommendations for things that we can do to keep our community safe. It is hard and important work, but I have no doubt that with some basic common sense strategies, we can set the standard among institutions for protecting our students and employees while still delivering the outstanding MSOE education that you have come to expect. And on top of that, we will have a new, beautiful and modern dining facility with expanded hours and food choices in the third floor of the campus center when you return. So for those of you who will be coming back to us, best of luck with the remainder of the spring quarter. Have a safe and enjoyable summer, and I look forward to welcoming you back in the fall on our campus. All the very best.
So we announced the intention to come back in person. Everybody wanted that, you know. I mean, we always say, oh, you know, it's going fine, but people did not like the fully online experience. Students who enjoyed not being with their family for a variety of reasons were back to living with their family while attending classes full time. And it was very difficult for a lot of people. I would also add that unemployment was at the highest level since the Great Depression during this time. And overall, it was a very bad situation for a lot of people. So everybody was saying, you know, we're going to come back in person in the fall. We didn't actually know if we would be able to do that. At this time, I was looking at signing leases for apartments, and I really did not want to agree to paying 12 months of rent if my classes were back online in the fall, you know. And so I can tell you, while we all wanted to come back, and we said that was our intention, we were not sure that we could follow through on that. So, yeah, the instructors and students did not like the online classes. The professors, I talked to a few about it, and they were saying that it was very difficult to just gauge if students were understanding what they were saying because they couldn't see their faces while they were talking. They didn't know if people understood what was going on, and you also didn't know if people were paying attention even, and to a large extent you didn't know if somebody was cheating. There was a lot of check use, you know, a lot of papers that were taped to walls and stuff. So the academics were kind of compromised. The adults at home, you know, would not always have access to daycare, and everyone was living at the same house and working and studying at the same house. So you would have people with their work calls and the kids in the back, and, you know, everything was going on at once, and it was kind of wild. I guess something that I would point out is you would see Dr. Wallace's video was recorded in his house. It was not a professional recording. And that's how a lot of things were. Like, even news broadcasts at this time period were, you know, the reporters were zooming in to the TV station and they were reporting from their house with their kids in the background.
There's that great video where that girl walks in like this and the baby comes in. And
yeah, and then the mom like, excuse me, yeah.
There's
So-
one of the lawyer that became a
Yeah.
cat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot about that, but yeah, that's a very good one. Yeah. So it was just kind of crazy. And this led to a very negative effect of mental health across the nation that to a large extent we're still figuring out what the actual effect was. We know that it happened, but we're still getting new data on it. And then of course MSOE said we intend to return to in-person classes. And they were putting together a plan. Also in 2020, you know, looking at the bigger picture, we see that during the pandemic, racial justice came to the forefront in our discussions. So Asian Americans early on were targeted due to the coronavirus being associated with China and Asia in general. My favorite takeout place in the area, Lucky Lou's, they're about a half mile away from here. They had to close temporarily because their workers were being harassed. We saw in the data that we were recording that black people in Wisconsin were 7 times more likely to die from COVID than white people. And it's not that COVID is racist, right? But we live in a society where these groups were not getting as good medical care because of a lot of historical factors. We also saw George Floyd get killed by Minneapolis police in May of 2020, which resulted in many large protests and really uplifted the conversation about racial justice. So due to this, MSOE responded by emphasizing their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that's something that we continue to see on campus with added signage, with programs to educate student organization leaders and other groups about these things. And honestly, before this point, it was really not something that MSOE touched on at all. We were really not, known for diversity. To an extent, we aren't really, but there was never any discussion about it to the degree that we see now. And we saw our Dean of Admissions, Sandra Mitchell, promoted to Vice President of Student Affairs and Campus Inclusion, which was a new position that they created specifically to work on inclusion and belonging at MSOE. So now we have the return in the fall. So MSOE returns to hybrid classes in the fall term of 2020, but students can still request to be fully online if they're not comfortable with this. Every classroom had a limited capacity. It was about a half to a third of what the number of chairs would be in there. So what they would do is they would divide a class into 3 cohorts, which would meet online 2 sessions out of the week and in person for 1. And if you had labs for your courses, they would be alternating weeks where you would have like an online lab where either you get data for it or you do a simulation and then you take data in person for a different lab. As far as taking exams, like you can see, this is the current center field house. Whenever we had to get a large group of people together, there were only a few areas on campus where that would be allowed. So specifically, that would be the Kern Center, Todd Weir Auditorium, and the dining commons, which you could not have people taking exams in. So really, it was only those 2 areas where you could have large gatherings, which wasn't really like a fun gathering, but the city determined a gathering to be anytime you had a group of people together. In, say, the cafeteria or in the library, we had plastic dividers installed on the tables, and we marked seating with these signs, which did not have a corner cut out of them, but this one does. So these would be marked on here, and then you could only sit at this spot or wherever that marking was. We also had stickers on the floor in certain areas or on the sidewalks to tell you that you can walk this direction here and that direction there to get people not really walking next to each other. Do you have something to add, Mitch?
I have 2 pieces of trivia actually.
Oh, sure.
First, there's a matching black sticker for that says "Do not sit here."
Ah.
That would go on all the spots that are too close to each other. And there's actually an old sign if you go in the business building to the back stairwell closest to the parking lot on the side of MLH. There is an original sticker that says "Down, only go down this staircase."
Yeah.
That's still up. They haven't gotten to taking that down yet.
Yeah, so some staircases, like you mentioned, were actually one direction as well, where you could only go down or you could only go up. Unless it was like an emergency or something, then obviously you could go either way. During this time, dining services offered to-go boxes. That was kind of nice. But, you know, we burned through a lot of those, and they started looking at different ways we could do that. And eventually they just got rid of it because we didn't really need it anymore. And it was required that you would wear a face mask at all times on campus, as long as you were indoors. Another thing that I'll add is every dorm resident received one of these bags. This is a genuine original bag I pulled from our storage area, and it includes so it includes a thermometer. I'll show that first, and then this is a Medline thermometer, a card on how to use the thermometer, a MSOE gray fabric mask, and instructions on how to wash your mask.
Wow.
So, yeah, this was given to every resident.
They gave it to me when I got hired.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. In my, like, goodie bag.
Yeah. So there's that. I guess something I kind of forgot to mention earlier is early on you had homemade fabric masks. This was made by my grandma. There were a variety of ways that people did this. We didn't really know what we were doing. You couldn't really buy what were professionally made things, or they were really for medical professionals at that point. So you would make ones at home. Some people would make them out of t-shirts, you know, or if you had fabric, you could do that. Later on, you really saw a lot of these disposable ones. They're paper, has a metal strip on the top to form around your nose. Unfortunately, with the disposable ones, a lot of people just kind of threw them on the ground, you know, when they were done with them. And towards the end, you started to see a lot of the N95 and KN95 masks being used by the general population. These would be considered the best and could actually stop all of the particles from COVID going into your nose and mouth, whereas these other solutions were not perfect. So that was how that worked. MSOE conducted mandatory surveillance testing and had self-reporting of symptoms used to track cases on campus. You would use your MSOE thermometer to take a daily temperature check and the Rave Guardian app to confirm that you were not sick. In the dorms, you were not allowed to have guests in the residence halls that were from outside of the MSOE community. So the idea here is that we're having our own bubble where we're only letting in our students. You could have someone from the building in your room, but it was one guest per resident. So if you're in a single room, you can have one other person in there. If you're in a double room, you can have 2 people over. This also applied to Roman Towers apartments if you were in the honors ones, especially because those were under residence life and you still had an RA in Groman Tower. But even for the whole building, if you were busted for having a party in Groman Tower, you would be evicted from Groman Tower, and that did happen to people. In this time, the RWJ dorm was being renovated into Beach Tower, so we only had one dorm, which meant a lot of this residence hall policy did not apply to people because sophomores were allowed to not live on campus because one of our buildings was not inhabitable. But I personally lived in the Aloft Hotel under a deal that was struck with MSOE and the hotel where, you know, we had some upperclassmen living there, and that was a sweet deal because I got a hotel room with a king-size memory foam bed that was cleaned every week. You know, I had my own bathroom. It was slick, you know, and it costed the same as an MLH dorm. So, you know, very cool. the isolation procedure, this is a later flow chart that came out because you'll see it includes if you're vaccinated or not and other things. At this time, we still did not have proper treatments or vaccines. And that's kind of a big thing behind why we didn't want parties on campus, is we couldn't treat this other than letting you sit in a bed for a while, or maybe if you were like dying, put you on a ventilator, which there were not a lot of. So if you got sick, it was very bad, and you would be sick for a while, and you would get a lot of other people sick. So it was very important that we took this seriously at the time. We had tarp rooms set up on the 12th floor of MLH, where I don't know if those were actually used, because we also had actual rooms on the 12th floor, like the RHA room now, and another storage room up there that had like 4 beds in them. And we would always use those before we used the tarp rooms, because nobody wants to live in a tarp room with like a bed in it. It was just a bed and tarp walls. It was kind of awful. And what they would do is they would bring food up to you, and so this would be probably Betty, or you know, an RA would be assigned to bring up food to you. And actually, in a later video, I showed that process. But what does the campus experience look like? Okay, so every club meeting on campus looked like this. They were all Zoom calls, or Teams calls, I mean. They all looked exactly the same.
John, I don't think that's an isolation room.
No. So you could set your background in Microsoft Teams. So you'll see some people have blurred backgrounds. My background is the radio club room, because it was on the 12th floor. You couldn't get up to the radio club room.
Okay, so 7 question. All right, so that's 7 in favor.
Stop eating the banana like that.
Did you put this in just for the banana?
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's a recorded meeting. Of course, I'm not going to just put a banana in my mouth.
Without taking out of context.
The sub ones were genuinely fun, though.
Yeah, the meetings, you know, they were all right. Especially now that we were back on campus, we could kind of plan small events, or you know, over that spring term when we were sent home, you didn't really have club meetings because there was no point. You know, you'd never see them around. At least with this, you know, you're meeting with people and you'll see them walking by in the halls and stuff, and eventually maybe you'll be able to plan an event. Every event that you would plan would have to have a approved safety plan on file with Campus Life. So you would have to make sure you're under the requirements for how many people you have, you know, how are you going to spread people out. And it was, I will say it was basically impossible to run an event at this point because of how strict that was. I mean, you know, we're kids in classes, and now we have to come up with a whole safety plan and organize an event and then execute the event with volunteers. So overall, student organizations in this time suffered, and many of them have not bounced back, or you know, took a while to. So in this time, we experimented with different ways of doing things. Like RHA had an open mic night where they just had a microphone in the middle of a room, and then it would go to a Teams call, but people would walk from their dorm to the microphone, sing on the microphone, and everyone in the Teams call would hear it. And then they could leave their dorm and come back. And then you'd go back to your dorm to listen to the other people, you know, and it was like a whole thing.
Did
right?
people come to that?
Yes. I went to it, a few people did. It wasn't like a crazy popular event. Like if you were to run an open mic night now, you would have way more people there than this, right? So people did go to it, but overall it was not very popular. We also had our first bingo event of the year. It was completely online, except if you won something, you would run to the CC and pick it up. And that was considered not a successful event. Later on, we started doing hybrid events. So Angel and I actually did Halloween bingo in fall of 2020. And that was where the whole Bilky Bingo Man thing started. Because up to that point, I was not the Bingo Man. I mean, this was my sophomore year, and I only started with that. And we had some people in person, we had some people online, and it worked out pretty well. Yeah, yeah, it was kind of genius. Another thing was we did a lot of stuff outdoors. This is, you know, you wouldn't know what club this is if I didn't label it, but this is the radio club. And that's the radio club booth at the outdoor student organization fair. So we're wearing masks and we're outdoors and we're at tables that are spread out by like 10 feet. And all the clubs have their tables, and not a lot of people went to this. It also was raining, to be fair.
I remember.
But we did what we could to try to get the word out for clubs. But like, if you didn't join the Microsoft team at the start of the year, we didn't hold meetings in person that you would come to. You would need to use a link to join this team. So if you didn't join the club early on or ask somebody for a link, if you knew somebody who could do that, you would not be able to join the club. So basically, you really only saw the people who were in the clubs before join the Microsoft team. And then people didn't really funnel into clubs, and they really lost a lot of membership in that class that came in that fall term. For a while, we did pretty good with this. Like, we had 5 cases our first week. It started to increase a bit, you know, it went down and then it went up. And this is done through our surveillance testing that MSOE did. So if you were told that you had to take a test, you were required to go to the top of your auditorium, swab your nose, put it in a cooler, and then wait for the test results. And this was really only possible because testing technology had improved to where we could get a test result in a few days. Early on, if you sent a test into a lab, it took like 5 days to get your results back. So that's why you see, like in the news clips, they say that we have confirmed cases, we have pending tests, and then we have negative tests. So you wouldn't really know you were sick until you had symptoms, and you know, the tests weren't super helpful except for saying, okay, I do have COVID, or, you know, maybe I have a cold or something. By October 29th, by that week, we saw that the number of cases on campus was up significantly. Bye. And at this point, we started panicking a little bit. Like, we weren't freaking out, right? But we were saying, like, what does this mean? Because the trend is going up. It's not going the direction that we want.
All right. Okay.
Okay. So Dr. Walls comes back to us and he says, okay, like, we're seeing a trend that we don't like. We're going to be restricting things further. So earlier we were able to do some of those events where we could have a decent number of people in approved spaces, like the dining area. Now all gatherings are limited to 10 people. And that's not like, you know, that includes like going to class, that includes taking exams. That's not just like having an event, right? That's not, you know, I'm having a dance, I can only have 10 people. That's, you know, I'm taking an exam, I can only have 10 people in one room. This also resulted in increased surveillance testing. If you saw the number of tests that we did, we only did 51 tests. So yes, we had 11% of our tests coming back positive, which would indicate that 1 in 10 students at MSOE had COVID. In reality, we only had 6 positive tests, so we just weren't testing enough people. And one could argue that perhaps we were just not doing enough testing to accurately determine how many people were sick, and we may have gotten unlucky with this number. But we did see a noticeable trend. Like, we were getting an increased number of cases, but it might not have been 1 in 10 MSOE students have COVID. But no matter what, the changes were put in. Then we start to see things really taper off through the winter term. So this is kind of a sub-meeting. You know, we rolled back the restrictions and we could have people meeting up in person. So there's me and Angel over there doing our little exchange. And I do not think we were meeting the social distancing requirements with this, but at that point we kind of didn't care anymore. I mean, Sub as a club was like the most extroverted people at MSOE. And you'll see on the TV screen that we had the option of being hybrid. So the group that you see in this picture not only refused to go online, but also showed up in person. And so this is like peak extroverted MSOE student. We don't care about these restrictions. We're just gonna get together and do this. So that's kind of how that happened. 1 year after, we're back to March of 2021 now. So this is about 1 year after the announcement was made. Dr. Walls puts out another video, and this video, I could play it again and point out a lot of specific things in it because you see a lot of things here of changes that were made on campus.
1 year ago, a new virus was spreading throughout our world. Words like coronavirus, COVID-19, and social distancing became a part of our vocabulary and dominated every aspect of our lives. I am proud of how our faculty and staff came together to face this pandemic head on. We truly were united by our core values of collaboration, excellence, inclusion, innovation, integrity, and stewardship. Each one of you played an instrumental role in keeping our mission alive. In less than a week, our faculty quickly pivoted to move our instruction online with support from the CREATE Institute, academic support staff, and IT. Custodial services, facilities, and environmental health services kept our buildings clean and safe. The registrar's office helped figure out how and where we could safely gather on campus for in-person instruction. Public safety ensured the safety and security of our campus and helped transport students to COVID testing locations and health appointments. The admissions team never let up on their new student recruitment efforts. Financial aid and university advancement helped students access financial resources to get them through. The COVID care team, including health services, the dean of students, residence life, student life, and the wellness center, guided students through the ever-changing circumstances and provided critical support and resources for their physical and emotional well-being. In times that tested companies and universities throughout the world, our community was truly extraordinary together. Each and every one of our faculty and staff members rethought what was possible and made it happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you to maintenance staff. Thank you for everything you do. We appreciate you a lot.
Thank you, MSOE, for all that you've done.
Thank you.
There's quite a bit to unpack here. See a lot of hand sanitizer bottles around. This is kind of a big thing. A lot of people would wear their masks, with their nose sticking out, or, put it under their chin. They didn't put it over their eyeballs. That's kind of a goofy one. But I mean, people would wear it under their chin, pull it down, or they would have with their nose sticking out, and that kind of reduced the effectiveness of the whole thing. So we had official university signage saying, you have to do this properly. There's Rich Phillips. Okay.
Richard.
Yes. Athletes practicing were wearing masks. Not the most comfortable experience, but you had to do it.
He's wearing the mask wrong.
You see all of the dividers on the tables. Couldn't really hear people through those, like Brooke said. This is how they did the testing for COVID, is they would check your temperature on your forehead with the thermometer, which was kind of a gun type infrared one. And then they would have you swab your nose, which is shown here. So you would stick the swab up your nose, and then you put it in a vial, and you would put it into a cooler. And this all happened in the Todd Weir Auditorium. Going back here, all these there's the capacity limit sign that was outside every room on campus. The registrar went through every single room and set limits for capacity. There's the library with the dividers and the tables. Public safety, you know, working hard. You can see behind the officer there, that's Veets Tower under construction. So construction for Veets Tower happened entirely during the pandemic. In that staircase, there's a red sign on the door that says the direction that you can use it. And then there's also signs on the walls for social distancing. You could take the campus shuttle to get tested for COVID, and later on you could take it to get vaccinated. Although that happened after I got vaccinated and they would not drive me when I asked, so you know, whatever, but okay. There, you know, entrance and exit doors were labeled with signs. The admissions department continued running tours throughout this whole thing, which is something I kind of took issue with because, like, in the dorms, at certain points, we could not have guests over, like our family, but they were bringing through groups of prospective students from outside MSOE to see it, which I understand because people want to see the dorms, but I took issue with that. Here's Betty bringing food to the shelf where you would pick up your food if you were in COVID isolation. That's what the rooms look like that were kind of the makeshift ones. Not the most comfortable experience. That's a bag of the tests that they would have, you know. Might be all, yeah. Funky. All right, so spring of 2021. You got the vaccines coming out. It was, you know, Pfizer and Moderna that were 2 doses. They had to be frozen at very low temperature, so the rollout was kind of slow with those. And then later you saw the J&J one come out, which a little sus, but you know, it was a one and done type of deal, so people chose to do that. It was, you know, rolled out in groups with the vaccines, right? So you had it going to the seniors first and healthcare workers, and then you really worked your way down to college students, which were not a priority at all. But I believe I might have gotten it before, like, I guess the everybody slot, because it might have been something to do with living in a, you know, large housing complex like a dorm or attending a university. But our age group was one of the last ones to get, you know, the vaccine, and by that point they'd opened it up to so many people that getting an appointment to get a vaccine was challenging. But they also opened up these emergency clinics at random places like the Summerfest grounds in the Wisconsin Center, where you could go and there was just, you know, rows and rows of these booths that were mostly tarp put up. And then like at the Wisconsin Center they had like FEMA agents and like soldiers doing the vaccines. At the Summerfest grounds, that was sponsored by Kroger, so they had Kroger pharmacists at Summerfest. So I walked to the Summerfest grounds to get my first dose of the vaccine, and I got that from a Kroger pharmacist.
Did hip like hip ever go trending?
Hip like hip, really? I didn't see any usage really of the hashtag. But if you got your vaccine, you had the award of a hip like hip sticker and pin, and I'll be handing these out to everyone here at the end of the meeting. Oh yeah. And that's the Wisconsin Center's vaccine line. You can't really see a whole lot with it, but that was there. And so now that the vaccine's rolling out, we're starting to see the cases really go down. At this point, everything's really kind of under control. You see the larger events return for the first time. So this is the Spring Fling Dance. You can see that all the food is individually wrapped, and we have hand sanitizer. Except for the cupcakes, those were not individually wrapped. But we don't talk about that. This was some kind of spring carnival thing where, you know, we had it outdoors again and we spaced out the tables, and our table was a shooting gallery I built. It was an electric one, so you'd hit a target and a bell would ring. It was pretty badass. But that was kind of cool because, you know, we could have people shooting at it from, you know, 10 feet away. So, fall of 2021. We see for the first time that the mask mandate is rolled back over the summer. they backtrack on that because it was a little early for that at that point. The MSOE administration was very trigger happy on getting rid of restrictions by this point. They wanted to do as much as they could, and maybe they went a little too fast with this stuff. But by the time we returned for fall term of 2021, they removed all capacity limits. So instead of having these hybrid classes, everyone was in person for classes and labs and stuff. So that was cool. But in exchange for that, you were required to wear a mask, which, you know, I would take that. The decision making for coming back to fall was, you know, some considerations that they put in were the vaccination numbers. By the time that we were actually starting the term, we were looking at basically 50-50 on vaccinated and unvaccinated. And what you'll notice here is because a lot of these are two-step vaccines, they also track the people with the first dose. So you see a lot of people who are not interested in taking the vaccine, they never got the first dose. And you see a lot of people who got two. And it's really split in half of people who, you know, it's by this point in time, if you wanted the vaccine, you got it. And we saw that half of us did not want it at all. But something to consider with these numbers of why they were considered low, because this was significantly behind the national average, this was significantly behind the state average. The reasoning is that these are self-reported numbers. Also, kind of younger people thought, you know, well, I'm not going to get as sick from COVID, so why would I get the vaccine? There was, you know, you would not get as sick a second time if you got COVID because you would have some immunity to it. And MSOE never required a COVID vaccine to come back, unlike other universities. So that's kind of why these numbers are low. And this was like right before we came back, and this is after it was announced that you could win Bucks tickets, a Chipotle gift card, AirPods, or a 3D printer if you got a vaccine and went into this raffle. Before this was announced with the prizes, we were looking at like 40 or even 35% numbers. Like it was slowly increasing with people reporting their vaccines, but people were really not getting them. They were just reporting more. And surprisingly, our all-time high was not, you know, before the vaccine came out. It was not, you know, when we were just coming back. The all-time high was now that we are all together without capacity limits, and this Omicron variant has come out and become the dominant strain. So in mid-January of 2022, actually, we see a terrifying chart where we go from 12 cases a week to 73. And, you know, as a member of the residence life staff at this point, we had completely filled isolation rooms. And when we would bring people their meals, we would be using carts, and the carts would be completely covered, you know, top and bottom with to-go boxes of people's food. So my statement was, okay, I'll see you online. This was also kind of during the GameStop stock era, so it's, you know, to the moon, diamond hands, you know. These numbers, you know, they're blowing up. So we see another response from the president on this. Typically, if you saw a trend like that, you would get an email from the president of the university. So Dr. Wall says, we're committed to continuing online person. Some faculty may continue teaching online for a limited period. So online is back on the table here because some faculty members were very uncomfortable with what they were seeing. I mean, what you would notice though with these charts is that the faculty numbers stayed relatively low. So this is really something that was going on probably outside of our classroom and on-campus experience. This is probably something that was happening in people's personal lives, right? This spreading. But, you know, after this, you know, we start to see the numbers go down again. So some more immunity spreading around, and it ended up being okay. By mid-February, so we're only talking like a month after, when was this? This is mid-January. Late February, they say, okay, our numbers are so low now, that we're going to make masks optional outside of classrooms. So this isn't in class, but this is, when you're walking between classes, when you are, going to the cafeteria. And a big one was when you're in the residence halls, right? Because up to this point, if you're going to pee, you have to put a mask on when you leave your room, go to the bathroom, and then you take it off when you go back in your room. So it was kind of a big hassle. Outside of classrooms to now in class and outside of class, it becomes optional to wear a mask. And many people do choose to continue wearing them across campus, and to this day do still continue to wear them. It's kind of interesting to see how there are these spikes, and MSOE certainly reflects these numbers to some extent. But due to the different variants and things happening, we see these trends actually reflected in the number of cumulative cases. And now, where we are right now in the 2022-2023 academic school year, we see that cases are no longer tracked by MSOE, and COVID is largely treated like any other sickness, so there is no special protocol.